So on behalf of Major General Myatt and the Marines Memorial Association, I'd like to welcome you all to this session of our Meet the Author program. My name is Chris Starling, and I'm the Director of Military and Veteran Affairs here at the Marines Memorial Association. And I'll just introduce Max by saying that he is a graduate of the California College of the Arts, and he's an infantry Marine. And really, you don't need to say much more than that. But I will share one quick story, and that is April, a year ago, we had General Mattis here talking to the veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, and we had a full theater downstairs. And it was a great presentation, as it is whenever General Mattis addresses a group. And at the end, he opened it up for questions. And it's one of the reasons why we have question cards, is so that I can control it and people don't get up and make 10-minute speeches. Well, in this case, we did that, and then General Mattis said, well, I want to get one question from the audience, and he opened it up, and the guy in the front row stood up, and he said, General Mattis, I want to know, what's your favorite Terminal Lance cartoon? And then he introduced himself. My name's Max Uriarte, and I write Terminal Lance. And General Mattis looked at him, and he walked to the edge of the stage, and he looked down at Max, and he said, young man, if you ever put me in another one of your cartoons, I'm going to kill you. And the very next day, General Mattis was in Terminal Lance. So, without any further introduction, I would like to present to you Max Uriarte, Terminal Lance.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to start off by thanking the Marines Memorial Club, Chris Starling, and everybody else involved in setting all this up. Really incredible, and I really appreciate it. So thank you so much for having me. And as well, thank you all for coming out here to see my dumbass talk. I think that's pretty awesome. So hey, you know, it was a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps, and now I'm here talking to you guys. So that's pretty cool. And I would also like to thank and give a shout out to Major Taj Sarin's family, who is here. He was the pilot who was killed in England last year and ejected in order to steered the aircraft away from a residential area and ejected in order to save the lives of many civilians. So let's give them a hand. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and thank you so much. People have a lot of titles, right? There's a lot of titles in the world. Everybody has a title. I used to be a Lance Corporal. Funny story, I got promoted to Corporal 3 months after I got out of the Marine Corps when I was in the IRR. Thank you. It didn't do anything for me, really. You know, if I could hand it back, I would, but unfortunately, they decided to bestow that upon me. Personally, I think it was just like one last kick in the balls, just like, they just wanted to, like, they had to get it in there, you know, they just had to get that last one in there. So they promoted me 3 months after I got out. So that was my title, though. It was Lance Corporal Maximilian Uriarte. But there's tons of titles in the world. People call themselves all kinds of things. If you looked at me and you looked at what I do, you would look at the work that I do, Terminal Lance. You could call me a bunch of things. You could call me a writer, artist, illustrator, cartoonist, blogger, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff you could call me. But I like to... Since I'm self-employed, I get to make my own titles, right? So my title, what I prefer to call myself, is simply a creator. And as you see on the Terminal Lance comic strips, you'll see every single strip at the bottom says created by Maximilian Uriarte, because I think that is the one title that really encompasses kind of everything that I do and everything that I try to do with the work that I do, which is creating new things, creating new worlds, creating art that can potentially affect culture in the long run. And that's what I like to call myself. So let me tell you a little bit about Max. I put this presentation together. It's really cool. I have a dog named Charlie. He's my best friend. I love him to death. He just turned 8 years old. I think it was last week? Last week, I think. His name is Charlie. I grew up in Corvallis, Oregon. For those of you that don't know where that is, it's a little town kind of in the middle where that pin is. I grew up there. I was born and raised there. I moved to Portland at the age of 16, and I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps at the age of 19. Hoorah! Okay, Semper Fi. When I got out of the Marine Corps in 2010, I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area. Beautiful San Francisco, I love it. And I lived here for 5 years. I went to the California College of the Arts in Oakland in San Francisco. I started as an illustration major because I was doing Terminal Lance already, and I was like, I'm going to do comics. But then I saw all my friends in the animation department doing really awesome work with film and animation, and I knew that this blend of cinema and art was something that I really wanted to do. So I changed my major to animation, and I received a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the California College of the Arts in Oakland in 2013. And I occasionally do random work in Hollywood. This was from when I worked on the film Sabotage with director David Ayer and Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was really confused and uneasy about doing this hand signal, as you can tell from the look on his face. But Arnold Schwarzenegger, awesome dude. And it was a lot of fun working on that. I've also worked on some other things. I worked on the Fox show Enlisted, which had one season that did not do well. And I'm currently working on some other stuff too. I actually just recently moved down to LA to pursue a career in film and TV. So, probably the most important thing you should know about me is I was in the United States Marine Corps, which most of you probably know. That's me. That was a staged photo from a combat photographer while we were in Iraq. This was out in Karma in 2009. This was right outside of Ramadi. I was on 4 years active duty. Went on 2 combat deployments to Iraq. Between 2006 and 2010, I went in 07. I was there 07, 08, and then I went back in 09. I'm an 0351 infantry assaultman. I held many billets. I was a squad leader. I was a team leader. I was a gunner, small gunner. I also did I did a stint in the Armory. I did all kinds of stuff while I was in the Marine Corps. I was with 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines out in beautiful Kaneohe Bay in Hawaii. Hurrah! India Company, weapons platoon, assault squad section. So I was never, so I had a really interesting Marine Corps career in that I was offered many different opportunities, which I think a lot of Marines are not. Somehow it became publicly known throughout my battalion that I was really good at drawing, not to pat myself too hard on the back, but that I was skilled at drawing, adept in some way, and also at photography. So they basically handed me a camera during my second deployment to Iraq, and they're like, "You're going to be a photographer." And I was like, "Okay." Well, you know, what else could I say? So I did that. I was a billeted combat photographer and artist during my second deployment to Iraq, which by billeted, I mean I was not ever given the MOS of combat photographer or combat artist, which is no longer an active MOS. But I was doing that. I was practicing combat art and photography while I was in Iraq the second time. It was a lot of fun. It was great. It was actually a really, really different experience than the infantry, in that I got to travel all over Iraq and I got to see kind of the whole country from a much broader perspective that I didn't get to see in the first time as a turret gunner when I was in there, when I was in Zidon the first time I went. And I was honorably discharged at the rank of E3, Lance Corporal. And that last note is really important because it led to this guy, which I'm most well known for. Some of you might know. I am the creator of a comic strip called Terminal Lance. Now, Terminal Lance is a comic, which many of you are probably familiar with if you're here. I launched it January 5th, 2010. There's a story behind it. I actually had wanted to do Terminal Lance. I came up with the idea in like 2008-ish after my first deployment to Iraq. And when I came back, I was like, man, I really want to do this comic strip. I think it'd be a lot of fun. I sort of pitched it to the Hawaii Marine newspaper. There was the base newspaper, the PAO shop, and they didn't want to do it. They were like, you know. So I was like, okay. So they kind of sat on it for a while. And then in 2010, when I came back from Iraq the second time, I was like, okay, look, I want to do this comic. No one's going to help me do it. So if I want to do it, I just got to set it up myself and just put it out there. I was still active duty at the time. And I had no idea what was going to happen because no one had ever done anything like this before. So I launched it on January 5th, 2010, and it started off really small. I mean, I was myself going around doing this sort of guerrilla marketing with Terminal Lance. I was going around to the barracks around Hawaii and putting up flyers and business cards all over the walls and stuff in the laundry rooms and the lounges. We have card readers in most of the barracks now, so like I went and I had business cards and I put them in like all the card readers in the barracks. So when people get to the door, they got to pull it out and take a look at it. So that was sort of how I built the audience up like that at first. And then the Marine Corps Times sort of ran a story on it. And a few months later, I think it was really like 3 months into it. And that was when it kind of snowballed into, and it kept growing ever since then. It didn't snowball immediately. It didn't blow up immediately. But it definitely started growing from that point on kind of indefinitely. And funny story about when that happened. So the day, I think after the Marine Corps Times story came out, I had fapped over to the base combat camera shop after I came back from Iraq. So I only had a few months left on my contract. So I was working at ComCam, was not with my old unit anymore. I mean, I was technically, I guess, but I was, fapped out, so I was gone. I get a phone call from my old XO, from First Lieutenant Schmidl, and he calls me up. And he's like, "Hey, Uriarte, this is Lieutenant Schmidl. You got to come back to the company office." And I'm like, "Sir, I don't work with you anymore. I am with ComCam now. What do you want?" And he's like, "You got to come back here." And I'm like, "Okay." I had an idea what this might be about because, given what had just happened with the comic strip and everything. So I go back to the company office, and Lieutenant Schmidl informs me that the regimental sergeant major wants to talk to me. And I'm like, that's not good, Like, I'm a lance corporal of Marines. There's no good reason why I should be talking to the regimental sergeant major. You know what I mean? Like, there's not, like, a good scenario where this should be happening. So I meet up there's a master sergeant in the company, and he sort of like takes me over to the regimental sergeant major's office in Hawaii, and we go up to his office and we're waiting outside for a while, and then he comes back from PT. He's in his like PT shorts. He's like in rainbow PT gear though, so he's like dressed down. It's really casual. He's like, "Yeah, oh, come on in, Lance Corporal," and I'm like, "Okay." So I go into his office, big beautiful office, and he sits me down in front of his desk. He's like, "You want a bottle of water?" And I'm like, "I don't know where this is going, Sergeant Major." So it was totally like benign. He sat me down. He explained to me that, he knows about the Terminal Lance thing. He just wants to make sure that I'm following all the rules. I should go talk to the base JAG, make sure I'm not breaking any Marine Corps orders or anything like that, doing this comic strip of mine, this silly little thing. And I was like, "Okay, great." And then he's like, and then he left it with a vague threat. He was like, somebody had been going around the base apparently over the last like week or so, like spray painting Lance Corporal chevrons on the dumpsters. I knew nothing about it. To this day, I don't know anything about it. But he left it at, "If you know anything about this, and if we find out you know anything about this, there's going to be hell to pay." And I'm like, "Okay." I again don't know anything about it. So. Anyway, long story short, I did end up actually going and talking to the base JAG, figuring out if I was breaking any rules. Turned out I was not, which is great. So I was able to keep doing Terminal Lance while I was active duty, and I continued to do it. So it is, to continue on, it is published weekly in the Marine Corps Times doesn't do weekly anymore. Now they do once every 2 weeks. This just changed. They just got bought by a new company. Random note. But so the Marine Corps Times, the strip is published separately in the Military Times, Marine Corps Times newspaper since November of 2010. Currently, we have over 550,000 Facebook fans, so it's pretty crazy. It's sort of, Terminal Lance has really paved the way for the military social media scene. Like, there really wasn't anything like it before Terminal Lance kind of came on the scene and was doing what it was doing. The website itself gets about 100,000 hits a day. It can be double or triple that depending on if the comic is really popular that day or whatever. And it's published on the website twice a week, every Tuesday and Friday. And, just to sort of people always ask me, like, what was the inspiration? Why did you start Terminal Lance? Why did you do this to us? And really, I feel like when Terminal Lance, before it existed, there wasn't anything like it. And when I say that, I mean, like, there was one comic strip that I can think of called Semper Tunes by Gunny Wolf, which some of you are, I'm sure all of you might have heard of at some point. And he's a great guy. He's a gunnery sergeant doing a comic strip. It's in Leatherneck magazine. It's really like, hoorah, Semper Fi Marine Corps kind of thing. But I found that my experience in the Marine Corps was so different than that. I found that the people that I served with, these are Iraq veterans. You know, this is a war that was not popular. It's a war that has a lot of infamy behind it. And I found a lot of my generation was not as hoorah, Semper Fi. And I felt like that comic didn't really speak to the generation of Marines that I knew, that I had been around the last 4 years. And so I wanted to make a comic that really resonated with that generation of Marines, that really spoke to the OIF, OEF generation of Marines. So that was really why I did Terminal Lance, and that's why I keep doing Terminal Lance. So in 2013, I graduated from the California College of the Arts in Oakland, beautiful Oakland, Rockridge, California, and I had to find a job. So I had a degree in animation, and the animation industry had kind of collapsed on itself that summer, which was like perfect timing for me to graduate. And Rhythm and Hues went down. They did the special effects of Life of Pi. It's a whole thing with animation. It was a nightmare trying to find a job. So I was able to find a job literally the weekend before I started doing this whole White Donkey thing. So I had this idea for a book, and I had wanted to do this book for a really long time. I actually have files on my computer that are illustrations of the White Donkey from all the way back to like 2011. But I had actually initially thought of the idea in 2010. That was when I really came up with the idea of the White Donkey, the graphic novel. At this point, I wasn't even calling it the White Donkey. This was just a graphic novel about the Marine Corps, about Terminal Lance that I wanted to do. So there is a story behind this White Donkey. When I was in Iraq the first time, I was part of a mounted platoon. We were company jump platoon. And we were traveling down Zidon Road, southeast of Fallujah, in the Zidon region of Iraq. It's a little place along the Euphrates River. So this is one of my first times outside the wire ever, and I'm like scared out of my mind. So the thing, they tell you in training, oh, you got to look out for anything suspicious in the road. You know, you have all these IED courses that you go through. You do a little walk-through IED course, and they're like, oh, look out for any craters or trash or wires or anything that looks suspicious, because it could be a bomb and it could blow up and you're going to die. So that was great training. What they don't tell you is that it's a third world country, and when you get there, when you get it, you're looking around, there's trash and craters and shit everywhere. And I was pretty convinced I was gonna die. Like, I'm on my first combat patrol, and I'm like, this was the dumbest idea I've ever had in my life. Why am I here? I'm gonna die right now. So I was, silently freaking out. Obviously not outwardly, but I was scared. I was really scared, like, to be honest. And all of a sudden, our convoy comes to a complete stop. And I remember this because my platoon commander gets on the hook, and he's all like, hey, Vic 1, this is Vic 2. Why do we stop? And I hear back over the radio from my section leader, Corporal Albrecht, who is in the book too, there is a donkey in the road. And I was like, what does that mean? So, what does it mean? So I went, I remember looking toward the front of the convoy, and this donkey it wasn't just like stuck in the middle of the road. No, it wasn't dead, it was alive. It wasn't crossing the road. It was walking in the same direction that we were going, dead center in the middle of the road. And there wasn't enough room on either side of it to go around it. And it was like the donkey was leading us, it was leading this convoy. And that image just like would not, so in real life, the donkey trotted along for maybe like 10 meters, and then it just sort of trotted off the side of the road. We drove past it, and I never saw it again, which is weird because we drove by that same spot every single day for the next 7 months, and I never ever saw the white donkey again. Never have ever seen a white donkey since then. Kind of weird. And I guess there were a couple of things about that really stood out to me. For one, I'd never seen a white donkey before. This is the first time I ever saw one. And two, there was something about that image of the donkey. So here we are, 5 vehicles, 5 mounted vehicles full of Marines, full loaded to the teeth. We have every weapon you can imagine. We got machine guns, we got rifles, we got grenades, we got grenade launchers, and 23 Marines, and the power and might of the United States military behind us. And we were brought to a screeching halt by this most benign animal, this stupid ass of an animal, this silly creature. And I like to think that it really made us all look like asses that day. And that image just like wouldn't leave my mind. It was a really powerful thing for me, and it sort of plagued my existence. I was like, man, this donkey, what does it mean? And so that sort of informed the overarching narrative for The White Donkey, the book. And in the book, you'll see that Abe is also very plagued by this donkey, plagued by what it means, trying to find meaning in it, if it has any, to offer him. And that was my experience with The White Donkey. And so The White Donkey itself was quite an adventure. It is the story of a United States Marine and his surreal journey to Iraq. So I did a Kickstarter, right? I was like, I want to make this book, but how am I going to make this book? You know, this is a huge book that I want to make, and you know, how do you do a 250-page graphic novel if you can't work on it full time? So my solution, I'll do a Kickstarter. That's what people do these days, right? So I was asking for $20,000 on the Kickstarter, and we raised that in 13 hours. And then in the end of it, over 30 days, we raised $162,000 to create and self-publish this book, The White Donkey. And it was extremely humbling, I think, for me to know that the fans of Terminal Lance believed in me and trusted me enough to really have that faith in me to actually create this book. Was really amazing, and I'm very grateful for it. So I made the book. So it's 284 pages, and that's a lot of work. And it's a really different kind of book than, it's a different kind of Terminal Lance approach than the regular comic strip is. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the process. So this book is very big. It's a very big book. What process is there? Like, this is a real logistical question. Like, how do you make a graphic novel? Can anybody tell me how to make a graphic novel? I have no idea. And so my initial process was to kind of approach it like I do with the Terminal Lance comic strip, which is I kind of have bullet point ideas, and then I formulate a joke, and I manage to string together 3 panels that work and have a punchline, and it's funny, and we all go home and we love ourselves. So that wasn't going to work for this, though, because this is such a big book, and the ideas in it were so big, and the overarching story structure was so different and so big that I had to basically figure it out on my own, because there wasn't really a whole lot of resources available on how to make a graphic novel. So this is actually the first initial outline that I ever did of the White Donkey book. And as you can see, it is a lot of stuff. It's sort of, you can't read any of this, but it basically illustrates all of the story, the character arcs, the story, the 3-act structure, because I wrote it as a screenplay, and the themes of the book. And so I wrote a screenplay. That is how I approached The White Donkey as a graphic novel, because I sort of, you know, writing a novel is very different. Writing a literary novel is very different, because you're kind of waxing poetic with the language itself. The language becomes part of the book. Whereas with a graphic novel, nobody's ever going to see the screenplay of it or the script of it. They're only going to see the finished product, which is the comic pages. So I wrote a screenplay because I'm familiar with that format, and it translates really well visually into a graphic novel. So I did that. I wrote a 145-page screenplay. It was the first screenplay I've ever written. At least the first full-length one I've ever written, like feature-length one. And this was sort of the next step, was thumbnailing the book. And these are actually, each one of these little rectangles is an individual page. And because of the size of the book and the size of the story, I had to basically plan out the entire book page for page before I could draw anything. Because drawing is very time-intensive. It's an investment of time. So I thumbnailed everything, which it's kind of crazy to look at, but you have to in order for it to work. And this is a really rough. This would be the next step. So from the thumbnail, this is like garbage, and nobody should ever see this. But I'm showing it to you guys because I trust you. So this is Just a rough sketch. I did all these on my iPad while I was working. This is sort of my workflow. Is I would do a really rough sketch, figure out where the speech bubbles are going to go with the action on the page, and that's how I would lay it out. And while I'm doing this, this is actually a really important stage because I'm trying to figure out how the reader is interpreting what I'm trying to get across. Because how the reader interprets the book is actually more important than what the book is about, if that makes any sense. Because if the reader doesn't interpret it correctly or the way that I want them to, it doesn't really matter what you're saying. So I don't know if that makes any sense at all. But I was thinking really hard about what the reader is actually going through reading the book. And so for me, it was a matter of figuring out how to draw the eye through the page to tell the story. From there, that's the rough sketch. I would do one layer of really rough pencils, and then I would draw over that a layer of finished pencils. Now, as an artist, I drew all this stuff myself. I'm an artist and a writer. But for myself, since I'm not working with any other artist, if you were working in a professional Marvel or DC, you'd want to have way tighter pencils than I do, but since I'm the only one working on it, it's just footnotes for me to be able to draw the ink. So then I would draw the ink. This is the ink pass. That's all the ink on the page. And then I would do toning for the book, and then that is the toning with the speech bubbles and the text added to it. So that is the process for every single page. And it turns out that doing this 250 times takes a really long time. And that's why the book took about a year and a half to finish. And it was a very long graphic novel. Most graphic novels are not 250 pages. This is a pretty long one. But this is the story I wanted to tell, and this is the singular narrative that I wanted to tell, and I wasn't going to compromise on it. And we raised enough money that I didn't have to compromise on it, so that was great. As far as the art direction goes, what was really important for me, again, is how the reader interprets everything. So I wanted to give these kind of subconscious cues of like where you are in the book. So even though it's a monotone book, really, technically, every section of the book is a different tone to it so that you know where you are kind of subconsciously in the book, in the story, without really thinking too much about it. So the Hawaiian part of the book is all greens, 29 palms, beautiful 29 palms. Those of you that know it, you know it. Are these sort of brown shades of red. At home in Portland, which is where I'm from, where I hail from, is blue, and then Iraq is this gold kind of tone. And as well, I wanted to point out the difference between the art direction of the comic strip, which is very intentionally different than the book. And this was by design. The book is such a more serious story. It's such a more serious kind of tale and narrative. The comic strip is really comical. I wanted to keep the comic strip really cartoony. It's funny. Every strip needs to be funny. Like, there's no room in the comic strip to not tell jokes. So, and also the strip is so much less realistic. Like, there's no reason to have it try to be realistic. There's literally a comic strip in the Terminal Lance series where someone literally turns into a giant douchebag when he pins on Corporal. So, like an actual douchebag. So, it's cartoony. It's not trying to be realistic. Whereas the graphic novel, The White Donkey, is very specifically different, and that was by design. This is a much more realistic tone to it, and that took a lot of time, too. And that's also why it also took a lot longer. I can draw the Terminal Lance comic strip a lot quicker than I can draw the White Donkey style of stuff. That's just a little bit on the art direction. The book, I self-published the book, actually, first. And it did great. It was really awesome. Me and my beautiful girlfriend here, we had a bet to see how long it would take to sell out. So basically what happened was, with the Kickstarter money, I printed 5,000 copies. 2,000 of those were going to Kickstarter backers, and the other 3,000 were sold on Amazon. And those 3,000 books sold in 36 hours on Amazon, sold completely out. The book was gone, and she won the bet, actually. She won. But the reception of it was great. Everybody loved, it seemed, not to sound too patting myself on the back, but People liked the book. It was great. I was really happy about that. And it got a lot of media coverage, and because of that, it got picked up by a publisher known as Little Brown and Company, and it came out on April 19th in hardcover, which is being sold right here. I don't know how many there are left. There's 5 left, so if you still need to buy it, you can still buy it here. 5 of you could be that lucky. So Little Brown, it was actually really, they've been phenomenal. When the book was making a splash when it initially came out, Little Brown, they were one of the first people that approached me about it. They were really passionate about the book, and that was why I went with them. I got approached by a few different publishers actually, and I went with Little Brown because they seemed to really care about the book. They cared about what it was saying, and they really were passionate about the project. So that's ultimately why I went with Little Brown. People always ask me, especially right now because of the white donkey and everything, what is next for Terminal Lance? I get that question all the time. And it's a good question because I don't even know. No, the website itself, so terminallance.com, is not going anywhere. I'm still doing the comic strip. I still want to do the comic strip, and I love doing it. I love making Marines laugh. That's sort of the point of Terminal Lance. And I intend to continue doing that. Terminal Lance, though, is now part of a corporation, owned by a corporation, which I just started officially. So my new corporation is called The White Donkey. And the future for me is animation. What I want to do is build an animation studio, and I want to tell stories like I do with Terminal Lance and The White Donkey, and I want to do it with animation in feature film and TV, and I want to do it in a way that nobody has ever seen before. I want to bring contemporary realist animation into the American market, which nobody has ever really been able to do before. And that's the goal of The White Donkey. And that's pretty much all I got. So that's what I'm doing now. And this is The White Donkey, and that's the future of Terminal Lance, is developing animation and stuff. So yeah, that's it.
One of the few places where a colonel can interview a lance corporal, and it doesn't involve office hours or something.
Yeah, I feel like I'm getting NJP'd
cool.
right now.
You're sitting right next to me, so this is great. And that was General Vandegrift's vision. When he had this vision for the club, is you kind of leave your rank at the door, and it enables a really frank and open kind of discussion among fellow veterans. Some people in the audience don't understand the title of Terminal Lance. Can you just it's pretty simple to explain, but for some, especially not Marines, maybe you could explain that.
Yeah, so a Terminal Lance Corporal, back up a minute. Most people in the Marine Corps, they do the 4-year thing, which is what I did. And anytime you're getting out of the Marine Corps, you're on terminal. You're considered terminal because your contract is terminating. So if you are a Lance Corporal, you would then be a Terminal Lance. You'd be a Terminal Lance Corporal. And generally that's a bad thing because usually, considering all ideal scenario, you would have picked up at least the rank of corporal by the time you've ended your 4-year contract in the Marine Corps. So usually people that are Terminal Lances are seen as people that do not care or have dropped their pack, as they say, and are generally not good Marines, as they like to sort of characterize them, which I don't necessarily agree with, but that is, I was a Terminal Lance, and I have a good conduct medal. I did fine. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
One of the questions that I have, there's actually 2 questions to it. It's your experience in Iraq. I thought one of the most interesting parts of the book, having spent 2 years in Iraq, was your interaction with the Iraqi police and with the Iraqi military. In particular, the police chief who lectures Abe about Americans are arrogant. I thought that was a really interesting piece. What was your interaction with the Iraqis, and what inspired you to write about that in particular?
So I, as part of the company Jump Platoon, we were kind of out interacting with the Iraqi police like all the time. So, every chance I got, I was mostly in the turret, or I was like at dismount, just holding security. But that meant I was standing around a lot doing nothing. So I'd go up to the Iraqi police and I'd be like, hey, I'd try to talk to them and interact with them and stuff. And I never really had any like really deep conversations with the Iraqi police, but in the book I wanted to put that perspective in there because I didn't want the story to feel so one-sided, and I didn't like the idea that somebody could reach a sort of. I think that it takes a lot of self-reflection to be able to take a step back and say, is this existential crisis, is the answer to my existential crisis, my enlightenment, is it okay to reach that at the expense of other people in a war that is killing many people, in a war that's taking place in another country? And actually, what's funny, there's kind of a story. This scene didn't exist in the first draft of The White Donkey, and then I remember I posted a photo to my Tumblr of me in Iraq, and I hashtagged it Iraq. And semantically, I think when any Marine or any service member says the word Iraq, they immediately refer to their experience. That means their deployment to Iraq. It means their combat deployment to Iraq. It's referring linguistically to their deployment. And somebody had replied to my post, and they left a comment that said, "I hate it when American soldiers hashtag things Iraq. This country doesn't belong to you. It never was yours." And at first I was super offended. I got into like my veteran mode. I was like, how dare she belittle my experience in Iraq, But then I was thinking about it, and this woman, I looked at her profile, and she was actually from Iraq. This is a woman in Iraq, angry at the fact that I had hashtagged this photo of myself, a Marine in Iraq, in my full armor and everything, looking all cool as Iraq. And so that sort of opened my eyes to this idea that it was like this experience of mine in Iraq was never really mine. I was part of this greater narrative in Iraq that was taking place, and I took part in that, but I don't own that experience. It wasn't really mine. And that was sort of the foundation of that scene, actually.
So in terms of inspiration for this book, a lot of it is your own personal experience. Did you also rely on other people's secondhand, third-hand stories to create this narrative, or was it really primarily based on your own observations?
It was all based on my own observations. It is a fictional story, and I want to, I'm really clear about that in the first page of the book. This is a work of fiction, because we all know how Marines are with stolen valor and all that stuff, and I'm not going to say anything that is untrue. So it is a fictional story at the end of the day. I think that, people ask me like how much of it is true, and it's like I feel like once you insert any fictional element into a based on a true story, it becomes a fictional story. You can't call it a true story. So the overarching structure of the story is essentially the exact story that I had going to Iraq. I was with 3-3 India Company going to Zaydan, etc. But then these literary elements, I mix it up to sort of fulfill the overarching character arc and narrative of the book, to get my own points across that I wanted to tell. So, so a lot of it is intermingled with other people's, not necessarily other people's experiences, but they were like my experiences that I observed that I sort of mixed into the narrative. Like, for instance, the scene, I don't know how many, the people that just bought the book tonight haven't read this yet, but there's a scene where Abe shoots a guy in the throat. He's on a rooftop. That's actually a combination of things that happened. It's a combination of one, I was on a rooftop, and almost the exact same scenario happened to me. And someone else in my company had shot a guy in the throat, and I had to respond to that as the company jumped. Our platoon went out to respond to that, and we had a medevac and all this stuff. So that was a combination of things that was sort of turned into one event in the book in order to fulfill the objective of the narrative, if that makes sense.
Going back to, you're in Oregon, you're in high school, what inspired you to sign up and join the Marine Corps?
Fun fact, I actually dropped out of high school. I dropped out at the age of 16. I got my good enough degree at the Portland Community College, a GED. So I had dropped out of high school at 16. I went to Portland Community College. I got my GED. The main reason was I moved from Corvallis to Portland at the age of 16, and I didn't want to graduate with people I didn't know, so it was just, I dropped out and got GED. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's what I did. But so I was at community college actually, and I don't know. I was going through like this 19-year-old, existential crisis of like, I need to do something crazy. I was like, I need to do the craziest thing I could possibly think of, and I had a bunch of scenarios in my head. I'd just seen Batman Begins. I think that was just when that movie came out. And I was like, man, I'm just going to like jump on a boat and like go train with ninjas. Like that's, like I got to do something. But the real reason is because I am, at the end of the day, before I'm a Marine, before anything else, I'm an artist. I'm a creator. And I knew that I wanted to create stories and work in art, but I needed some worldly experience. I needed something to like really back my own stories up, I guess. And so I needed to see something terrible. And so I guess my reaction to that was, what's the craziest thing I could do right now? And the war in Iraq was going on. This is 2006. And I was like, I'm going to join the Marine Corps Infantry. I'm going to go to Iraq. Well, it was mostly I want to go to Iraq. And then I was like, what's the quickest way to get to Iraq? Join the Marine Corps Infantry. So I went to the recruiter. Actually, funny story, at Portland Community College, there was a recruiting desk. These two guys they were set up at a recruiting desk there. And I had been thinking about it over the last like week or so. And then Sergeant Gilbert, he was a scout sniper. He just randomly, I walked by him, civilian max, and he's like, hey, you ever think of joining the military? And I was like, yes, I have. And I sat down. It was the easiest recruiting he's ever done in his life. And then he's like, oh, cool, you should come by the recruiting station tomorrow. And I was like, okay. So then I did. And then I just sort of enlisted from there. I scored like a 92 on the ASVAB when I took it. And then my recruiter was like, you can do anything you want, really. And I was like, oh, cool, I want to go infantry. And he was like, are you sure? Because you don't have to. And I was like, yeah, but what's the point if I don't go infantry, So that was, hoorah! So that's what I did. And that's sort of the story of how I enlisted.
That's one recruiter that went home and looked himself in the mirror and probably said, damn, I'm good. So I've read a lot of your cartoons, not all of them. I read your book. I never saw anything relating to politics. What are your politics, Max? I'm
not going to answer that question, actually, and that's policy on terminal lengths, and I think that it's really important because politics are so polarizing, and I think that most of the other veteran sort of centric social media environments really get bogged down into this sort of political vitriol, mostly right wing, and that's something that I just don't want any part of. I think that as soon as you state your political affiliation, or as soon as you make some post that's like, damn Obama or damn Trump or whatever, it polarizes everybody immediately. And so what's the point? I don't care. And for me, in the military, and I think most Marines who are active duty feel the same way, politics are so irrelevant, you don't care. It doesn't matter. It has no impact on why you're there and what you're doing. And most Marines are just there because they're there. We're all going through the same thing, and it sucks. And it doesn't really matter who's in charge. So, and also one thing, my old section leader, Corporal Albrecht, who is in the book too, one thing he told me a long time ago while we were in Iraq, actually, he said there's 3 things you should never talk to Marines about. One of them is religion. One of them is their wives, and the other one is politics. And so I try to, the wife thing, I try to steer clear of politics for those reasons.
That's a good answer to the question. So you answered it. Probably you'd also, once you polarize your readership, you might sell half as many books because you alienate one side.
Yeah, and
think of it from that side.
Yeah, and that's the thing is to the white donkey or to terminal lance, politics are so irrelevant. It doesn't matter. My job is to make Marines laugh and hopefully make them think a little bit, whatever. But my job isn't to push any political agenda.
When you said that your book was about interpretation, I thought that's a really good way to put it, because I know as I read it, I thought of other people reading it. Everyone has an experience on a deployment. Everybody has their own experience, so you interpret things in different ways. Is the audience for this book specifically veterans, war veterans, or were you looking to maybe also have other people interpret it, people that are civilians that don't have that kind of experience?
I mean, it was a little bit of both. I mean, primarily my audience is Marines, and I love them, and they're the best people in the world. So I wrote the book for Marines, I think, essentially. Like, really, at the end of the day, it was for Marines. I wanted to have a book that Marines, specifically combat veterans, could really identify with, and hopefully help them with any of their own experiences that maybe they're struggling with, their own resolutions, conflicts that they need resolutions to. And conflict and resolution really became a theme of the book too. And so I wrote it for Marines for that reason, really. And then at the same time, though, I was really conscious of civilian readers. Like there's some parts where, like, the coyote instructor is explaining what IEDs are and is explaining, what a chameleon is and stuff. And that is really for the civilian readers, because Marines know what that stuff is, but you do that class, which we all had to do, really, and it's a really good opportunity to explain to civilians kind of what's going on, what's an IED, why is it going to blow up and kill you. And so also for civilians, I think, for Marines, it's to help them cope with their own experiences. And then for civilians, I think it's just to help them gain a better understanding for what veterans go through, because there really is a pretty bad military-civilian divide. And I think that literature is a good way to help bridge that gap by gaining more understanding. And I think that, to be quite honest, veterans are equally responsible for the military-civilian divide as civilians are. So I think it's on both of us to kind of bridge that gap.
You talked recently that you were at a discussion down in Southern California with Sebastian Junger. Sebastian Junger recently published his book Tribe, and it talks about coming back from war. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with Sebastian Junger and what you learned from each other?
Yeah, Sebastian is a great guy, and we have the same publisher, so buy his book. No, it was awesome. It was a lot of fun. It was really cool meeting him, because he's such a legendary war reporter and author. And yeah, his book is really amazing. I think it opened up my eyes a lot on just tribe mentality. I think he makes a lot of really awesome sort of points, and I think it's really good for veterans. And what I like about Sebastian Junger too is that he is not military technically. Like, he's not, even though he's been embedded with a bunch of different units, and he did Restrepo, if you don't know, just an amazing guy. Been all over the world, been all kinds of war zones, more than most Marines probably have. And so he's very unbiased, though. And so his evaluation of Marines, and he talks about how a culture of PTSD can lead to victimhood amongst veterans and stuff. So it's a really eye-opening book. I do actually really recommend it for veterans, especially to read it. I think it gives you just a good sort of cathartic understanding of your own experiences and how that can kind of relate to the larger veteran community and kind of what you see right now, if that makes any sense.
So the concepts of alienation and relationships and transitioning, these are things that you picked up in your book as well, and they were really striking parts of the book. Can you expand on that a little bit? What was your inspiration for that? Yeah,
I was worried, I think, when I first started writing the book, are people going to think this is some kind of people often say that there's a cliche of veterans with PTSD. There's a cliche of veterans with emotional issues and stuff when they come back from deployment. But I think that what that statement sort of grossly ignores is the idea that we still have, and there's actually a study just came out today, 20 veterans killing themselves every day. It's not 22, it's 20. 20 veterans killing themselves every day. And that's a very real issue. So at what point does it stop being a cliche and actually become a serious issue that we kind of need to talk about? And for my own experiences, I found when I came back from Iraq the first time, I was so angry, and I'm sure every veteran that's been there can relate to that. It's like, you feel like everything that people say to you is like an affront to your manhood. You're like, oh, how dare you say that to me? I just came back from Iraq. Where have you been? And we all feel that. You just feel so angry when you come back. And so that experience is very real, and that's something that I wanted to sort of explore what the White Donkey was really right about. And really, it's sort of cathartic for me to think about it, why am I doing this, And by putting that out there, by putting that into a narrative form that people can read and understand and digest, I think it helps them gain a better understanding. Not even just civilians that aren't familiar with it, but Marines gaining a better understanding for their own emotions, I think, is something that is one of the goals I had with the book.
And I also know, a lot of Marines, a lot of Lance Corporals are gun owners, and that also factored in. And as I got to the point in the book where the guy's back from Iraq, and then he's got a handgun. Are you a gun owner, or do you know a lot of other Marines that were gun owners? That this was how did that work its way in the book, and why is that significant?
My dad. So in the book, Abe's dad gives him a gun on his 18th birthday and calls him a man. And on my 18th birthday, my dad gave me a gun and called me a man. And that was sort of where that inspiration came from. I'm actually not a gun owner. I mean, I don't have that gun anymore. But no, I mean, a lot of Marines are gun owners. There was no like gun Second Amendment subtext in the book. That was never intended. But yeah, I don't know if that's the intent of the question. But
no, it's just it's a prevalent thing, and it's as you get to it, a lot of Marines, people don't know that, but if you're a young Marine, you have to keep your personal weapon in a Marine armory, and you go and sign out. So there's actually a lot of control. It's not like a Marine can keep a gun in his barracks. It's a very controlled environment.
Yeah.
So I think we have time for one or two last questions, and I want to ask you, so what is next for you now? You touched on it a little bit, but are you going to look at another book maybe, or you wrote a screenplay? Is your aspiration maybe to move toward film and use your degree that way?
Both of those, actually. So I have already started working on 2 books right now, both graphic novels. One of them is an already existing property, which I can't really talk about. The other one is an original story, again, like The White Donkey, but it is not military, so it's a totally non-military story. It is about a mother who, the protagonist is a mom, female, and her son is a meth addict. And that is also taken from a lot of my own experiences where I grew up around a lot of drug abuse and a lot of meth abuse, specifically in Oregon. And so I wanted to write a book that tackles that sort of subject matter. And the theme of motherhood is really prevalent in that book. That's really all I can say about it right now. But that's my next book. And the goal, though, so as I mentioned in the presentation, and this beautiful logo I have up here, this is my new animation studio. Actually, this, as a corporation, is intended to be an animation studio. So I will be, I don't have, it's just me right now. Literally, this is like last week. But I am officially the owner and CEO of The White Donkey as an animation studio entity. And the goal for that, I am developing Terminal Lance as an animated series. I am developing another show that's a 3D animated show that's a kind of spin-off of Terminal Lance. And I'm developing a live-action show. And I'm also developing The White Donkey into a feature animated film. And the goal for me, ultimately, like the end game of all of this, is to turn The White Donkey into an animated feature film using contemporary realism in animation, which nobody's doing in America right now. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
that answers. And we look forward to your continued success as a Marine leader. The greatest thing that can happen really to you is when your young Marines go off and do something extraordinary, and they leave the Marine Corps, they go back to civilian society, and they show how creative they are. They use some of those skills that they learned in the Marine Corps to do the things that you did. So my last question for you is, how do the things that you learned in the Marine Corps contribute to your success now?
I think what the Marine Corps gave me more than anything else is just the ability to keep going, like through anything, like no matter how shitty it gets, like just because it could always be worse. And that's what I can always tell myself now. Like for the rest of my life, I'd be like, yeah, at least I'm not in Iraq anymore. Like at least it's not like that, Like it could always be worse. And that's, I think, the greatest thing that the Marine Corps did for me. And just being exposed to that, like, just terrible lifestyle of being in the field all the time and eating MREs and like just how miserable It really gets. And that's what I always like to do with terminal lance. I think that one of my section leaders explained it to me a long time ago while I was active duty. Corporal Morton, amazing guy. He said that Marines are so close, you gain a brotherhood with Marines that you can't get with anybody else. And the reason for that is because you unite behind a common enemy, which is the Marine Corps. And so, as I like to always say, people ask me if I've ever missed the Marine Corps, and I always tell them I miss the Marines a lot more than I miss the Marine Corps.
Yeah, very true. So before we thank Max, I'd like to thank Orly and Nikki, who are pouring wine, Susan and Mike, who do our video and our photography, and Bridget from Books Inc., who's sold out of books, it would appear. I think there's nothing left over there. That's a pretty good day. And with that, I'd like to thank Max Uriarte, and you've written a fantastic book, and we wish you continued success, and we look forward to you coming back to the club with each next thing that you do. We're an audience up here in San Francisco that enjoys hearing from you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.